There is a tiny weather window of a few hours, unfortunately going into late tonight, where the wind and the rain is going to let off slightly when the wind moves from the, I think it was the northeast, to a crazily strong southerly, which is quite unusual here. Apparently it's going to get quite warm. Warm but extremely windy. So I'm taking the opportunity to get stuff done now outside, which I just won't be able to get done for the next couple of days.
Less said about that, the better, and I've tried to time my working days in Scotland to coincide with moments like this, with middling success. But stop prevaricating with bridges and let's sort out the rudder extension. The truly dedicated will recall that it went wobbly back on the previous sea legs. This is largely as there's a lot of rotational force on what was just 4 bolts passing through the fibreglass propeller guard. We need more, and by more, I mean metal. The rudder can come off first, and yes, I will be dealing with that once burgeoning but now rather dead and crusty barnacle community, but not yet. Patience. As a quick recap, this rudder originally didn't exist, and the lifeboat design relied on the prop guard angling left and right to steer. I wanted more, of course, as more is more, and so took a steel plate, thoroughly glassed and painted it for protection, and bolted it on. It's been great, until the wobbly episode. I mentioned steel, and I wasn't lying. Let's make a couple of short 6mm thick inserts made of marine grade 316 stainless. Perfect, and the edges finished with the mini grinder. No complaints so far, I trust. I'm going to set them flush into the fiberglass and then encapsulate them. My hope is that these will provide a much more solid anchor for bolting through, and the forces will no longer be able to slowly have the bolt screw threads eat into the fiberglass and create movement. This requires the deployment of a little used tool of mine, largely because I find an angle grinder much more fun, and the truth is that this isn't a real Dremel. My real one died, and I was too tight-fisted to replace it, and so got this knockoff. It's not as powerful and the chuck isn't as secure, but it performs an okay precision grinding and mining operation here. I considered which side of the propeller guard was best to cut the slots into, and ended up deciding on the insides. To be honest, there's no specific logic behind this, nor would there have been any logic for doing the outsides instead. The fiberglass fabric will extend beyond all 4 of the edges by a few inches to get a solid result, so let's prep the gel coat all around with gritty sandpaper, otherwise we'll get a rubbish mechanical bond with the epoxy resin. Acetone first though, to get rid of any salt, contamination or borderline illiterate YouTube channel trolls first. Instead of cutting cloth from a large sheet, it's neater to use a roll of glass fibre tape for these small jobs. It's woven, which performs a lot better than random chop strand mat. I'm preparing all the layers inside first, including a layer of nylon peel ply as the final ply. It satisfyingly rips off after curing to leave a nice textured resin surface for sanding, or more bonding, and also stops the surface ending up tacky. I have some leftover resin from a small job and so use that up first. You'll notice that this is Infusion resin, which is thinner than normal stuff. I like it as I find it wets out fabrics like glass, carbon and Kevlar more quickly. The downside, of course, would be if trying to brush onto vertical or overhanging surfaces, it may not cooperate in that case. Standard job here, and for beginners to composites, you need to be a lot more careful with mixing ratios with laminating epoxy than with polyester resins or 2-pack epoxy paints, which tend to be more forgiving. We're talking less than 1% error if you don't want curing issues, and that's tougher of course with small quantities. For the inside of the top of the prop guard, we'll need some strips of duct tape to keep it in place for curing, so I've attached those to the plastic film beneath the peel ply and wetted out the fabric before we head outside. This really is a simple line up and stick on job, but getting the tape in the right place and checking the glass fibre sheets are aligned takes some time. We can't have any air gaps or bridging under there, so it was worth a few minutes of checking, pressing, checking again, and a final massage as the epoxy began to cure after an hour or so. In hindsight, I should have made a solid formed plate to match the inside curve and then use strong clamps to use it as a compressor, but I didn't. I'll do the other bottom one second, and that's easier in the event that gravity continues to work in the manner to which we're accustomed. I can laminate this more normally, and it's important to give the surface, in this case the bare fiberglass prop guard and steel, a liberal coat of epoxy first. This should minimise any chance of delamination. Then plenty more resin as we layer up the fabric. Weight is not a consideration, as this is glass, hardly in the lightweight group of composite fabrics, so we won't go stingy on resin. Better that than having any dry fabric. Not bad, not bad. I chose the fast resin, so that should cure hard in about 12 hours. In the meantime, and I'm not getting stuck in properly yet, I thought I'd see how quickly the dried fouling comes off, especially as I want to add more epoxy paint to the galvanised steel skeg down there before anti-fouling. It turns out they ping off very easily, much faster than the attempted jet wash last year, and this also preps the surface for more paint. I was then distracted again by the totally useless combined prop shaft zinc anode and rope cutter that totally failed to cut ropes last September as we got snagged a couple of times near a rocky shore with an onshore wind. It's a crazy design. As the zinc corrodes, the securing bolts loosen, so neither the anode nor the cutter works. I'm scouting for a 2-part solution, but there's only 3 or so inches of space to attach things to. Time to solve another problem from last year, the wobbly auto helm tiller. For this, we need some JB Weld putty. Last year I relied on friction fit, and that was a very bad idea. My solution is that I've attached an M8 stainless bolt to the end of the tiller, making sure it's perfectly in line. Then I've bought a female thread hex block that will sit inside the top of the rubber post tube, all sized carefully of course to fill the gaps. And that block is hex, not cylindrical, since once that's all bonded in, it'll resist unwanted rotation much better. That's all cure, and hopefully will be an improvement on before. I considered using the welding machine, but it's just far too intricate for my skill level. I had a load of stuff curing outside that night, but...
Yeah, that sounds like rain to me. Cheers for that, BBC, and all the other forecasts. The glass work I've done outside is going to get wet.
Next day, a little better, and we can complete a job at the bow. Actual completion. A novelty, I know. I'm using yet more of these high-end tube brackets, which are dip galvanised to a much thicker coating than the cheaper options on the market, but I followed my normal process to match the external black and orange aesthetic that Alan has very much made his own. That, and another few layers of paint, can't hurt delaying any possible corrosion. I protect the screw threads with tissue so that they don't get gummed up, and then we can do a coat or two of etch primer and then a few coats of gloss paint, inside and out. I visualised and then mocked up how they'll all fit into their bow roll, but there's a problem. Measurements tell me that the 2 floor mounts are too long. Luckily they have 2 grub screws each, and we only need 1. So, out with the metal cutter it is. Also, a couple of very short sections of tube are needed. Barely any gap between the 2 brackets will remain when I unveil what this is actually for. This is why I keep offcuts, but aluminium doesn't really offer much of a show when it's cut. Rather dull and unsparky. I neatened off the shortened mounts, recoated the ends, and it's time to fix it all in. You've probably guessed by now. Those custom-made steel wire stays work fine to stop the bow railing from failing if fallen against, but it's left them with a, you guessed it, wobble. So I'm drilling into the bow vertical surfaces and prepping to fit the brackets. We're going belt and braces on these fixings, and since one of each of the brackets will have one of their bolts heading into the foam void, and not somewhere I can wash it and nut them, we are applying a strong epoxy adhesive both into those blind bolt holes and also across the entire flat base of the brackets as they meet the boat, except for a thin ring of sealant around the edges. We don't forget the basics, so I cleaned up the prep surface and got on with the exciting finale in the evening sunshine. There we go. Solid as a rock, and I may swap the wire stays for loose ropes that can be hooked and unhooked as and when people need to hop ashore from the bow during mooring. People of the channel, Baldwin filters! But not quite yet, because Alan needs another drink, and I hope that you can help.
You can probably tell that this is not my normal domestic scene, but I thought we'd have a bit of a change up for the day. What I want to talk to you about is Alan, team and I are going to be setting off onto the water in just a few weeks, and that means obviously we're going to be getting back into the zone when we need fuel, and there will also be quite a few fees when it comes to marinas and any other sorts of things that we have to deal with whilst we're on the move. I thought that I would once again ask Alan's army whether you would be willing to give us a hand and basically buy Alan a drink, which means of course a whole load of diesel. I'm going to set up the page on the website as normal, and so if anyone does want to chip in and give us a hand, click that link and select how much of a drink you want to buy Alan and me and our crew.
Well, given the dozens of wildly enthusiastic comments about how perfectly good Baldwin oil filters are, either you're all involved in a complex yet implausible marketing campaign from the Baldwin Filter Company, or you're all telling the truth. I'm feeling generous and assume the latter, so on it's gone. It's even colour coordinated. Imagine if the filter colour clashed with the engine. I'd have to put all other jobs on hold and repaint the entire engine. Right, I'll get straight on with the next episode. I've done a hell of a lot recently, and the bottleneck is the speed at which I can edit and upload episodes. I'm trying not to rush them, although this inimitable member of our community would, I presume, prefer that I cease all narratives and voiceovers and instead just show long unedited clips with cheap royalty-free music over the top. Oh, and please buy Alan a drink. Bye.